Hello, my name is Louise Whittaker and I'm a volunteer with the Battlefields Trust, the UK charity dedicated to preserving, interpreting and promoting British battlefields. You may have seen my YouTube presentation on the Battle of Boroughbridge. Bridge. I'd now like to talk about the Battle of Myton, fought only 8 miles from Boroughbridge Bridge a few years earlier, on the 20th of September 1319. Unlike Boroughbridge, Bridge, this was not a battle between Edward II and his rebellious magnates, but between Scottish and English forces during the First Scottish War of Independence. King Robert the Bruce, or Robert I of Scotland, had since 1296 waged war against Edward I for the right to be recognised as an independent king of Scotland, who ruled without English interference. Edward I refused to accept this, insisting that Scottish kings owed English rulers fealty. The war proved to be a hard struggle for Bruce and his supporters, with Edward I, the hammer of the Scots, determined to force their surrender, but Edward's death in July 1307 brought them a welcome respite. The new king, Edward II, lacking the military instincts of his father, soon gave up Edward I's intended pursuit of Bruce, and his absence from Scotland for several years proved to be the turning point in the Scottish king's fortunes. Edward's quarrels with his barons undermined his prosecution of the war, and following the resounding Scottish victory at Bannockburn in June 1314, Scottish forces were able to raid the north of England more or less at will. This involved raiding and burning crops, destroying property, driving off cattle, who were hardy enough to make the journey to Scotland, and taking prisoners for ransom. Berwick-upon-Tweed is pictured here from the battlefield at Halidon Hill. This important border fortress controlled the main east coast route between England and Scotland. In 1318 a Scottish army captured Berwick, and its loss was important enough to bring Edward II north once again. He made his court at York from October 1318, and in August 1319 he marched up to Berwick with a large army comprised of his leading nobles and their retainers to retake the town. Robert the Bruce didn't want to risk a battle at Berwick, and instead he employed a diversionary tactic. He sent a raiding party down the west coast, led by the Bannockburn veterans Sir James Douglas and Thomas Randolph, Earl of Moray, to ravage the north of England once again, in the hope of breaking the siege at Berwick by forcing the northern earls home to defend their lands. The raiders crossed the Pennines and moved into Yorkshire, looting and burning again as they went, including attacks on Northallerton and Boroughbridge. Bridge. The English are said to have learned from a captured Scottish spy that there was a plot for the raiding party to capture Queen Isabella, who was staying near York, and when William Melton, the Archbishop of York, heard about this, he had the Queen moved quickly to Nottingham for safety. Given the nature of the Scottish commanders, there may well have been some truth in this plot, as they were both masters of surprise. James Douglas, either Sir James the Good or Black Douglas, depending which side you were on, had previously captured both Douglas and Roxburgh castles in this manner, and the Earl of Moray had surprised and overpowered the garrison of 300 at Edinburgh Castle with only 30 men. John Barber's late 14th century Scottish poem, The Bruce, tells us that Moray had heard about a secret path up the rock face of the castle from a previous occupant, who used it to visit his girlfriend in town of an evening. Yorkshire-born William Melton had entered royal service in the household of the future Edward II, and made a name for himself by his financial acumen. By Edward's accession he had become Keeper of the Privy Seal and Treasurer of the Wardrobe. Elected to the Archbishopric of York in 1316, he now faced a dilemma. You can see him to this day, looking worried above the great west door of York Minster, probably very similar to how he looked when he heard that there was a Scottish raiding party on his doorstep. The captured spy had revealed the whereabouts of the Scottish camp at Myton, but what was the Archbishop to do with no nobles or men-at-arms, they being all up at Berwick with the king? A staunch supporter of Edward II, he decided that he had to raise an army, and with the help of Nicholas Fleming, the Mayor of York, and Sir John Hotham, Bishop of Ely and Lord Treasurer, This is what he did. This wasn't the first time that an Archbishop of York had raised a force to fight the Scots. Archbishop Thurston had done so in 1138, before the English victory at the Battle of the Standard near Northallerton, but his army had been led by experienced soldiers. William Melton's army were a mixture of laymen and clergy, burgesses, clerks and peasants, monks, priests and friars. The reason he was able to call on so many clergy may have been due to their gathering in York for the feast of St. Matthew on September the 21st. Chronicles report the figures for the English army as 10 to 15,000 men, and the smaller Scottish force at around 10,000, although as the total population of York at this time was only 11,000, it's probable that these figures were too high. Nevertheless, these were sizable armies, with reports of locals joining the English on their way to the battlefield. So what type of enemy were this amateur English army marching to meet? There is a vivid description given by Jean le Bel, a chronicler who accompanied Edward III on a campaign against the Scots in 1327, only a few years after this battle. When they want to pass into England, they are all mounted, except for the camp followers who are on foot. The knights and squires are mounted on good large rounces, and the other Scots on little hackneys. They bring no carts because of the mountainous terrain, nor do they carry any supplies of bread or wine. They are so little addicted to luxury that, in time of war, they can subsist well enough for a long time on half-cooked meat, without bread, and good river water, uncut with wine. They do without pots and kettles, since they cook their meat inside the hides of the animals which they have skinned, and they well know that they will find a great abundance of cattle in the country they are raiding, so they carry no other supplies, except that each one carries a large flat stone in his saddlebags, and ties behind him a sack of oatmeal. When they have eaten so much of this badly cooked meat that their stomachs feel weak, they throw this stone in the fire, and mix a bit of their oatmeal with water. When the stone is hot, they make a sort of biscuit on it, which they eat to restore their stomachs, so it is no marvel that they make longer marches than other people. In the 14th century, this landscape around the River Swale was a mixture of hay meadows and open fields. Since then, the floodplain meadows have been drained and cultivated, and the land built up, with the line of trees shown here being planted only in the 19th century. In the medieval period, it would have been a wide, flat landscape. Given the way that the Battle of Myton played out, it is here, in Myton pastures, that the main fighting took place. The Scots may have camped here in the pastures, although once their scouts told them an army was approaching, they may initially have pulled back further west. Knowing the limitations of his force, William Melton hoped to try and surprise the Scottish army, as he thought, no doubt correctly, that this would give his inexperienced army the best chance of success. In reality, this was highly unlikely to succeed due to the experience of the Scottish commanders, who no doubt sent out hobilars, mounted infantry, to watch nearby roads and bridges for the approach of any enemy. Hobilars, incidentally, derive their name from the light and agile horses they rode, known as hobbies. Here is the River Swale as you approach Myton pastures. The battle took place in the afternoon. The Lanercost Chronicle says after dinner, which meant the middle of the day. And there was also a report that the English had a picnic lunch on their way to the battlefield. But as they neared Myton, they did so stealthily, hoping for the surprise element. If they'd had men-at-arms with them, the Scots may have melted away. They weren't looking to fight a battle, but when they understood the nature of the men they were facing, it was probably irresistible. The English had to cross the medieval bridge over the River Swale, and whether it was this manoeuvre that meant they didn't form up properly in battle array, or whether through sheer inexperience, isn't certain. A Scottish army had previously lured an English one over a bridge to defeat at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, a victory for William Wallace, or, as he's better known, Mel Gibson. The Scots set fire to a few haystacks to create a smoke screen, and formed their army up behind this into a schiltron, a tightly packed formation of spearmen. Think a large lethal hedgehog. So, as the smoke cleared, what the English saw advancing towards them, with a reported tremendous shout, was this. It's no picnic now. Another near contemporary source, The Life of Edward II, compares the two armies, saying, "They were indeed men picked from the whole of Scotland for their fighting ability, fit for every task. Many of our men, on the other hand, were untrained in the art of war, and were readier to flee than to fight." With no men at arms to steady them, the English army simply broke and fled back towards the river, only to find that hobbilers had ridden around the back of them on either side and were blocking the bridge. Some men made it to the river, but drowned in their haste to try and escape. Most had no option but to try and fight. Sources report English dead as between 1 and 4,000, the 1,000 coming from the Scottish account, the Bruce, and a large number of captives being taken. Scottish casualties were only light. William Melton and John Hotham escaped on horseback, but Nicholas Fleming, the York mayor, was less fortunate and was cut to pieces, together with a large number of clergymen, around 300 of them in full clerical dress, which gave the battle its nicknames of the Chapter of Myton or the White Battle. A glimpse of some lay casualties of the battle may be seen in a 1326 document, which includes details of the inability of 84 tenants to pay the farm at Easingwold. Of these, the Scots are blamed for 57 defaults, including 13 killed at the Battle of Myton and a further 9 at the Battle of Old Byland, fought around Sutton Bank in autumn 1322. So Myton was a decisive victory for the Scots, and an additional gift to the raiding party who'd taken the prisoners to ransom. The Anonymal Chronicle mentions just one of these prisoners. Sir William Ermine, a noble and valiant clerk, was captured there and taken to Scotland, imprisoned, and was subsequently freed for a heavy ransom. It was also a vindication of Robert the Bruce's plan, in that when news of the raid reached Berwick, the siege was indeed abandoned as the northern earls returned home to defend their lands, but the raiding party with their prisoners returned home safely up the West March. It also sowed further dissension amongst the English, with rumours that Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, had been in league with the Scots and privy to their plan to capture the Queen, something which Lancaster angrily denied, and accused the royal favourite Hugh Despenser of instead. The Scots made a further raid into the Western March before the end of 1319, after which a truce was agreed between Edward II and Robert the Bruce, to last from December 1319 until Christmas 1321. The first Scottish raids after this took place in early 1322, possibly in support of the rebellion of Thomas of Lancaster, which ended with his defeat at Boroughbridge. The Scottish commanders Douglas and Moray made further raids into England, but despite all these, the devastation in the north of England, and his own military setbacks, Edward II never did acknowledge Scottish independence, and the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, which ended this first period of conflict, was agreed only after his deposition. The battlefield today forms a pleasant walk on permitted paths. It is possible to park on the grass verge at Myton-on-Swale and walk through the village to cross the River Swale on a fine Victorian bridge into Myton pastures, at the entrance to which stands this striking battle information board. If you want to learn more about the Battle of Myton, or a number of other British battles, why not check out the Resource Centre at the Battlefields Trust website. If you like this presentation and the Trust's other YouTube content, please consider making a donation to our charity on the website. Thank you very much.